Hey, welcome to Brain Octane. My name is Dr. Eric Shoemake. Happy to have you with me today. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I've been doing a ton of research on how to really boost your brain function. And today we're going to talk about three things: memory, mood, and sleep. And you're going to see why sleep is so important. And I have some mind blowing things that are going to help you get better sleep that will improve your mood and your memory. We're also going to talk about how to have a more dense brain. We're going to talk about the three biggest things you need to avoid that cause damage to the brain and causing increasing risk of dementia, increasing risk of like brain fog, Alzheimer's disease, and we're going to give you some great solutions to anxiety and depression today as well. So can't wait to get into it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you here, and we're going to get started. Okay, here we go. So the brain is a fascinating thing. And I'm going to share some things with you from a lot of this from Stanford PhDs, a lot of brand new research on the brain, how the brain is designed to work. And you're going to learn some things today that are going to really help you. And I want you to share this with the people around you because there are so many people struggling with this right now. And that's really where I want to start. I want to start with my heart and why I'm doing this. So I've spent dozens and dozens and dozens of hours on this presentation, including learning all of these things. And the reason that I do this, and I'm not charging people for it, is because the world desperately needs to know this, which means when you hear it, you need to share it with somebody else because this really can change the world and change the way people are seeing things right now. So there's two things that I'm going to talk about, and then we'll get into the specifics. Number one is the incredible capacity of your nervous system. And we don't think about the nervous system very much. Like you don't think about how incredible the structures of your brain and your spinal cord and the spinal nerves are to your body. And you're going to learn about things like locus coeruleus. You're going to learn about the neocortex. You're going to learn about the vagus nerve. You're going to learn about neurotransmitters. You're going to learn about mechanoreceptors and how all of those things are set up for you to thrive if you cooperate with the way your body was designed to function. So this is a great quote talking about the brain and the spinal cord, because the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, that's what interprets your environment and then transfers that into either a chemical, usually some type of chemical that makes you feel a certain way. Chemicals make you feel happy or sad. Chemicals make you sleepy or not sleepy. And we're going to talk about those chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, cortisol, GABA. We're going to talk about all of those things today. But your nervous system is what basically translates your experience of the world into something that means something to you. So it's a great quote. It says, what connects the mind to the body is the nervous system, which medical textbooks refer to as the master control system. You'll be amazed how the spine and nervous system are interrelated to and connected to every aspect of our expression of health and wellness. Literally, it's the most important thing in your body if you know how to access it and cooperate with the way it was designed. So we're going to discuss what part of the brain works, how it works, what things you can do during the day and during night to sleep better, to have more mood, to improve your mood, and to have a more dense brain, how to really take care of that nervous system. The other part is going to be functional medicine, though. So how functional medicine can save the world. How can functional medicine save the world? Well, it's a difference. There's a difference between functional medicine and conventional medicine. Okay, so conventional medicine is going to the doctor, typically taking medication, and it's disease oriented. It's wait until you're sick and then you deal with the disease. It's doctor centered because the doctor is control of it and control of it. Everyone's treated the same. You're not treated. They're not looking at you from a functional perspective. They're looking at you as, oh, we did this blood work. Your cholesterol is 201. You need to be taking a statin. And I know not all doctors do this, but the vast majority of doctors, they're in this model. And it's not the doctor's fault. That's just the model that they're in. That's the way it's set up. You're very much just a number and flow chart. Doesn't mean they don't care about you, but the way they look at you is like, if you have this, you need this. If this causes this side effect, you need this. And if you need this, you need this. There's more and more specialties, right? So instead of one person looking at you, there's 5 people that don't talk to each other, managing your case. Diagnosis is based on symptoms, and it's really based on early detection. Okay. Now, early detection of disease is not prevention of disease. Now, functional medicine, health oriented, not disease oriented. We're looking at how to build your health. It's patient centered. We're looking at you as a holistic individual, not as a number on a chart that came back from LabCorp. We look at the underlying cause of disease, There's biochemical individuality. So we look at what's good for you versus other people. And it's a preventative approach. Okay. So when you put these two things together, when you put the nervous system together with functional medicine, which is what we do, I look at people's blood work every single day from a functional perspective, not from a disease perspective. I look at people's diets from a functional perspective, not a disease perspective. We do this treating you as an individual. And we also work with the nervous system. When you put those two things together, it can save the world, because here's what's happening in the world right now. We are setting records. Specifically, who is setting records is Big Pharma is setting records for sales above and beyond anything that we've ever seen in the past. So with the new vaccine, so Pfizer, the companies that were making the vaccine, made billions of dollars on that. If you look at drugs right now, we're 5% of the world's population. We take almost 3/4 of the world's drugs right now. If you look at the blockbuster drugs that are out there, cholesterol drugs, some of these new biologic drugs, blood pressure medications, pain medications, pharma's doing really, really well. Their statistics are great. Well, we're also setting records for things like mental health disorders. That's risen to 1 in 4 adults in the United States have a diagnosable mental health condition. 1 in 4. You're not designed to have a mental health condition. If you have anxiety, depression, ADHD, any things that they're talking about, that is a warning sign from your body telling you something with the nervous system is out of balance. That's what it's telling you. Okay. So if you're feeling those things, there's a cause to the problem, but it's telling you something. But what we do in conventional medicine is you go get put on some type of medication, like an antidepressant. I'm going to show you how you can do things naturally to relieve depression and anxiety instead of getting put on those medications, because it's not fixing the cause of the problem. And again, we'll get into that more in a few minutes. So we have more mental illness than ever. Suicide rates have gone up dramatically. Anxiety, especially in our children, has gone up by a factor of 4 in the last 3 years. We have more Alzheimer's than any other country in the world. I'm going to show you something called the healthcare tsunami in just a minute. We have more heart disease, cancer, diabetes than any other country in the world. So we're not doing well. And if we're not doing well and pharma is doing well, we're obviously doing something wrong. So what I want you to do with everything I'm going to teach you here is share it with the people around you. Do I have your commitment to doing that? If I do, then I'm going to move forward. Otherwise, I've spent dozens and dozens and dozens of hours on this when I could have just given you a PowerPoint with a few things. So the things that I have dived into or have dove into, I guess, over the last months to put this workshop together, I'm happy to share with you. I just want you to share it with other people around. Okay. Okay. So this is the healthcare tsunami that I was talking about. So we are going to talk about memory today. And a big part of that is Alzheimer's disease. So this is what I call the healthcare tsunami. So at their peak, 78 million baby boomers are going to be retired at the same time, which is right about now. Okay. So we've seen this coming for the last 13 years. I started talking about this in 2011. 18% of those people will have Alzheimer's disease. 1 in 5 will have Alzheimer's disease. Again, that's not normal. Okay. But that's what's happening in our country. And we're going to show you why that's happening in our country. The average cost of caring for these patients is $203 a day per person. That's $3 billion with a B dollars per day, or $1 trillion per year. There's a lot of talk about spending money on the war in Ukraine. There's a lot of talk about taxes. There's a lot of talk about our deficit and our spending. Well, nobody's talking about the $1 trillion a year that we're spending taking care of people with Alzheimer's disease, not to mention how miserable their lives are at that point. Nobody wants to have that. But what's happening is Alzheimer's is growing exponentially. So this is worldwide Alzheimer's prevalence. 2005, 27 million people, jump up to 2020, 41 million people. You jump up to 2030, 56 million people. By 2050, 106 million people will have Alzheimer's disease. Okay. That's a massive amount of people for a disease that is common, but is not normal and is largely preventable based on the things that we're going to talk about today. Okay. So what do we do about it? Number one is we start to avoid the things that I call brain busters. Okay. So I'm going to show you how these brain busters are linked, and these toxins in your brain are linked to neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's, like dementia. All of those things have been linked to specific toxins in your brain. So the brain busters that we're going to discuss are aspartame or sucralose. Those are two artificial sweeteners that are the most prevalent. So aspartame and sucralose, I'm going to basically talk about aspartame because that's in so many things now, but sucralose you could use interchangeable. Glyphosate, which is a weed killer that they spray on almost every food that is genetically modified, that is not organic. And then poor sleep and stress. So when we did a survey for this workshop, we asked everybody to put beads in which one of the jars you had the most problem with. Was it sleep? Was it mood? Or was it stress? And stress, the jar, the marbles in the jar for stress was like this. We had like 3 times as many marbles there. So I'm going to show you how sleep actually affects stress. We're going to show you some different things that you can do to reduce your stress levels and increase your happiness levels as well. So let's go ahead and get into aspartame first. Now, aspartame, if you've heard me talk before, I rarely say never, like you should never eat this or you should never eat that. But I will tell you, aspartame is something I will never put into my body. So if I have the worst breath on planet Earth and you offer me a stick of gum that has aspartame, sorry, you're going to have to deal with my bad breath because I'm not going to be killing my brain cells because of the artificial sweetener that's in gum and is in pretty much all gum. Okay. So aspartame has been linked to behavioral and cognitive problems, including learning problems, headaches, seizures, migraines, irritable mood, anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Those are the things that are happening now. It's also been linked to brain cell death, which has been linked to dementia. Now, where is aspartame? Aspartame is an artificial sweetener, doesn't have any calories, but it does have brain poison. So where is it? It's in cereals. It's in chewing gum. Almost all chewing gum that's not something like Spry or something sweetened with stevia or xylitol has that in it. So Orbit's gum. I think they started putting it at like almost all mints now. What are those breath mints that you buy? I don't think Altoids just used to have sugar, but I think they may have started putting aspartame in Altoids. It's in Big Red. It's in every gum that you put in your mouth, just about has aspartame in it. It's in cooking sauces. It's in anything that says diet. Diet or sugar-free, okay? Diet or sugar-free almost always has aspartame. Tabletop sweeteners, that's the blue packet and the yellow packet. Those are the sweeteners there. It's in yogurt, right? Because they don't want to put so much sugar, so they put aspartame in it. You want to avoid this at all costs. Now, the reason you want to avoid this is aspartame is broken down in your body into formaldehyde. Would you drink formaldehyde? No, you would not. But that's what your body breaks down aspartame into, formaldehyde. And that further gets broken down into methanol, which is wood alcohol. So if you've ever seen, I watched that show Moonshiners because it's fascinating. These people making whiskey in like Kentucky and Carolina out in the woods. Well, what they have, and they all have seen people that have gone blind from drinking moonshine because what they're drinking when they mess up the distilling process is methanol, which is wood alcohol, which is a potent toxin. It causes you to go blind or crazy because it kills your brain cells. Well, that's what you're getting if you don't have to drink moonshine to do that. You do that when you're getting aspartame, when you're eating aspartame. So you need to read and write this down right here. And if you read every food label that tastes sweet, anything that you put in your body that tastes sweet, look and make sure it doesn't have aspartame. It's also in like your Trident gum, sweetened with the xylitol. So there's new Trident gum that says sweetened with the xylitol because you're like, oh, Dr. Eric said xylitol is good for me. But then it'll say xylitol and then the 2 ingredients later is aspartame. So yeah, it's sweetened with xylitol, but it's also sweetened with aspartame. So you have to avoid anything that says aspartame. So instead of using those, I don't want you using a lot of sugar. I would rather you do sugar than aspartame. But instead of that, you could use something like monk fruit, which is great for you. Or you can also use something like stevia. Going to be a much safer thing for you. Okay, so we don't want to be killing our brain cells with aspartame. Now, the other one that you can do that you have to avoid, you have to really watch out for, is anything that's genetically modified, specifically glyphosate. Okay. Now, glyphosate is made by Monsanto. It's the active ingredient in herbicides. It inhibits an enzyme that's essential for plant growth, specifically weeds. Okay. So it inhibits the growth of weeds. They spray it on crops like crazy because they don't want weeds killing the crops because that costs money. Now, glyphosate is also in something called Roundup, which you can buy. I think they finally just now started taking it off the shelves in like Home Depot and Lowe's, but it's still sprayed on all of your food. Okay. It's not enzyme. That enzyme isn't present in humans or animals. So it says, thus contributing to the lower risk of human health when used according to label directions. That's what it says. The thing is, that's not true. It's not true at all, because it's not, we're not talking about what it does to your enzymes, or we're talking about the toxic effect that it has specifically on your gut and your brain. Okay. So this is the incidence of glyphosate use and autism. Okay. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. Since we're talking about your brain, autism is a developmental or neurodevelopmental disorder that happens to your brain. Okay. So issues happen in your brain structurally that cause this autism spectrum of effects. So this is the increased risk or increased incidence of autism since 1995. Okay. So number of children with autism over here, and this is the year right here. Okay. So the yellow bars are the amount of the increase immense or incidence of autism over the years. Number one, now I want to say something about this. This is staggering, and we should all be outraged that this has happened. When I got out of school, autism used to be, 1 in 10,000. They said maybe 1 in 1,000 at the most. And now it's 1 in 36 boys are on the autism spectrum. What the heck happened in the last 22 years since I graduated? Well, let's take a look. So 1995, very little autism. And then this is just up to 2009, a massive increase, 7-8-fold increase in autism just to 2009. It's gone up more since then. But what the red line here is this is the glyphosate applied to corn and soy crops. Okay. Now, corn and soy is in so many things that are into the traditional food supply in the United States. So what happened is, as glyphosate started to be sprayed on our crops more, it's a linear graph. This is not coincidence. So could the amount of glyphosate being sprayed on all of our crops be contributing to autism? Absolutely. What the heck else caused it? So that's one thing that could be. The amount of mercury that's in vaccines has been linked to it. The different toxins, because autism has a the key, the hallmark of autism for kids with autism are an inability to excrete toxins, to get rid of toxins the way other kids were. That's why some kids can be exposed to a toxin and they're fine. Some kids can be exposed to a toxin and they have autism spectrum disorder because of it, because they do not excrete toxins the same as the kids that don't, develop autism. There's a ton of research into that. So how do you get rid of glyphosate? Well, you need to use organic products. So buy things that are organic. So especially if you're doing anything that has corn or soybean oil, corn, dextrose from corn. There's so many things, high fructose corn syrup. They actually take things like dextrose that they make from corn and put it into your food as sweetener. So it doesn't say corn, it says dextrose, but it still came from the corn that was sprayed with glyphosate. So if you use non-GMO foods, you're going to be safe, because non-GMO foods cannot be sprayed with glyphosate. If you use organic foods, you're going to be safe, because organic foods can't be sprayed with glyphosate. So you really got to watch out for those. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about sleep and mood, or sleep and stress, in just a few minutes, but I also want to talk about memory here. Okay. So we're avoiding the things that are causing damage, but then we also want to make sure we're increasing our memory function. So people with great memory and people with great long-term, so the people that avoid dementia and Alzheimer's, have different brains. So they've actually done studies and looked at autopsies of brains for people that died with Alzheimer's and died without Alzheimer's. And they found the people that died without Alzheimer's had more density to their brain, which means there were more neural connections to their brain, because your brain has something called neuroplasticity. So if you're constantly learning, if you're constantly challenging your brain, if you're constantly exercising and doing the things we're going to talk about, you're making more neural connections in your brain, because your brain takes the things that happen every day and consolidates it. So it's kind of like a thumb drive. I don't know if I have one here or not. So yeah, if you have I'm talking about a USB drive. So if you have a thumb drive, that's like everything that happens to you is put on that thumb drive. And when you sleep at night, your brain takes that thumb drive, consolidates it to the hard drive, like you transferring the thumb drive to a hard drive on your computer. That's what happens every single day when you sleep, every single day when you perceive anything or learn anything. Your brain is constantly integrating that into itself, which is the hard drive. Okay. So when it does that, it becomes more dense, and you're much less likely to have Alzheimer's or dementia if you have a dense brain. So what can you do to increase the density of your brain? Well, one thing you can do here is meditation. Okay, meditation has been shown to increase neural connections and increase the density of your brain and decrease stress hormones in your brain. So Usually what the research says 10 to 20 minutes a day, which is just, you can be sitting quietly, you can do your own type of meditation, you can meditate on anything. You can meditate on scripture, you can meditate on your breath, you can meditate on, just silence. There's a lot of things that you can do there. And I get a lot of pushback on this because people say I can't meditate. It doesn't mean you sit there with your brain blank. What it means is that you train your brain to start working for you. So if I meditate and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to focus on my breath. Well, I could probably do that for a couple of minutes, and then I start thinking about breakfast. All right, so start thinking about what I need to do later on with the software, or I need for the office, or I need to think about I got to make sure I schedule this thing for this workshop. But what I do is I recognize that thought and I bring it back to my breath. That's the skill you're trying to build. You're actually building neural connections in your brain when you do that. So you're not failing when you're meditating because you're thinking about something else. The skill is realize you're thinking about something else and going, I'm not being present now. Let me bring this back to the present moment and focus on my breath. That's building density in your brain. Okay. That's why meditation is so good. You can also do guided meditations. There's so many apps that do that. YouTube has a million guided meditations that help you stay focused and present. So meditation or mindfulness is a great way to increase your brain density. Game playing. So this has video games. So there actually are some benefits to playing games because that stimulates your brain. You're learning new things. Like when my son plays video games, he's learning new worlds. He's learning new methods. He's learning new strategies. That's a good thing. Now, is that all he should be doing? No. Should we limit it? Sure. But great game playing is good for adults. I love the app Lumosity, which has like memory games. So if you look at Lumosity, you can get that on your phone, and you can play like a daily memory game. So it'll have like pictures, like it has like a grid, and you'll turn one over and it'll have a picture of a tree, and then it flips it back over, and you turn another one over, it has a picture of a bird, and then you turn another one over, it has a picture of a tree. You're like, oh, that one matches that one. So you play games like that. That stimulates those neural connections in your brain, to give you a healthier, denser brain. Okay. Foods rich in omega-3s, which is fish oil. I'm going to talk a lot about the importance of fish oil for your brain because you are a fat head. Your brain is made up 99% of fat. So you need to have the right fats in your brain. Exercise. Exercise increases those neural connections and gives you a denser brain. Another one, musical training, learning how to play an instrument. Now, you don't have to be a master, pianist or a guitar player or something like that, but just learning how to play an instrument, learning how to do any new skill increases the neural connections in your brain. So, like for me, I'm a good guitar player. I play guitar since I was a kid. I played in bands in college. But I could still learn songs, right? So like I'll sit down and, oh, I like that song. I'll learn that song. There's tutorials. You can do that really easily now. But I also try to teach myself how to play piano. Now, am I good? No, but I can play a few songs. I can play some notes. I bought a banjo recently, which is challenging the heck out of my brain because that's really hard to play that thing for me. So learning an instrument, learning a skill, learning how to do something increases your brain density. Okay. So all of these increase your brain density. So what are you doing on a daily basis to increase your brain density? For me, I meditate every day. I try to do some type of brain building game per day. I take my fish oil every day. I exercise 4 or 5 days a week. And I try to learn something new. I read a book or I try to learn something new all the time because I want to make sure that I'm increasing my brain density. Okay. So hopefully that will help you with the memory side of things. Okay. So maybe start looking into some of these. Now, mood. This is where it gets to be fascinating. As we talk about mood here, I'm going to talk about something called dopamine. Okay. So at the beginning, I discussed when you have any input into your body, it gets turned into a chemical. Okay. One of those chemicals is called dopamine. Okay. So we're going to talk about baseline dopamine in a minute. So this is dopamine here. Everybody has what's called a baseline level of dopamine. This is a baseline level. Now we want that baseline level to be higher. Okay. So high baseline dopamine levels equals happy. Those people that have higher levels of baseline dopamine in their brain report themselves to be happier and more content. Okay. And less stressed. So when everybody says I deal with stress like crazy, it's because you probably don't have a high enough level of baseline dopamine to make you happy. So stress equals, for most people, I'm anxious, I'm out of time, I'm in a hurry, I feel uneasy. Well, one of the antidotes to that is raising your baseline dopamine levels. So there are ways to increase your baseline dopamine levels. The biggest by far is quality sleep. So I'm going to spend a good bit of time on sleep here in just a few minutes. So the biggest by far is quality sleep. So we'll get into that in a minute. But here's another thing. I'm going to talk about cold showers in a few minutes. So if you've heard of Wim Hof, Wim Hof is, I think he's Dutch. And he's a fascinating individual. He does a lot of work with cold exposure, specific cold exposure, like cold plunges, cold showers, and the effect that that has on your nervous system. He's an amazing person. WIMHOF is his name. He has a whole course you can buy for like $99. You can go through for 30 days, which I highly recommend. I've done it several times. But he talks about the benefits of cold exposure. And one of the things that cold exposure does is raises your level of baseline dopamine, which is amazing. So after you take a cold shower, hours after that, your baseline dopamine levels go up, which makes you more happy, makes you more focused, makes you less stressed. We'll talk about how to do a cold shower in a few minutes. Don't worry, it's not that hard. AM sunlight, I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes when it comes to sleep as well. Getting sunlight in the morning especially raises your dopamine levels. Exercise, so going and doing a 20 or 30-minute workout or going for a walk around the block raises your baseline dopamine levels. Also eating something called tyrosine-rich foods, because tyrosine is a precursor for dopamine. So that includes almonds, avocados, banana, beef, chicken, eggs, all of those things, almonds, avocados, beef, chicken, eggs. Those things raise your baseline levels of dopamine. Turmeric, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Vitamin D, which again, I'll talk about in a few minutes. Vitamin D increases that. Magnesium, omega-3, so fish oil supplements, all of those things raise baseline dopamine, okay? But again, the biggest way to raise baseline dopamine is quality sleep. So when we get into sleep here in a minute, I'm going to discuss how you can structure your day to get better sleep, but also structure your day to raise your baseline dopamine levels, okay? That's what we're going to get into here when it comes to sleep. Now, another thing about why we are so stressed and overwhelmed and anxious in our country is this thing right here, okay? This is your cell phone, okay? Your cell phone is one of the reasons that you have one in four people have a diagnosable mental disorder right now, or over half of people in the United States report themselves as dealing with anxiety issues or depression issues. A lot of it has to do with this thing right here called your cell phone. Now, why? Because this is a dopamine producer, and it's a cheap form of dopamine. So when I see this little alert right here, or I see that I got a text, or I see these 4 blue dots right here says I got some text, that gives me a little dopamine hit. Okay. So it doesn't raise my baseline dopamine. It gives me this little hit of dopamine. Okay. So you have a baseline level of dopamine. What you want to avoid is a bunch of highs and lows. You want to have just kind of a steady wave of dopamine. You don't want to have peaks. So what happens when something novel happens, like you get a text, you check something on social media, somebody replies to something, you get an email or anything else, you get a little hit of dopamine. And when you get a hit of dopamine, what happens is what goes up must come down. So then you get what's called a dopamine deficit. And your mood really decreases here. And the more peaks and valleys you get, the more your baseline dopamine levels go down over time. So what happens is we've measured people have lower levels of baseline dopamine now than they did 20 years ago, largely because we're getting these quick hits. We're getting these multiple waves of dopamine over and over again. It's overstimulation of our body. So you want to earn your dopamine, okay? Which means doing worthwhile things, not checking your phone, social media, drinking to excess, watching TV. Those things raise dopamine too, but they spike your dopamine so that you end up with a dopamine crash later on. So we want to work on things that raise your levels of baseline dopamine. That's the cold shower. That's the exercise. That's doing quality, meaningful work, right? Those things raise your levels of baseline dopamine, okay? Now, the biggest way, again, to raise your dopamine levels is going to be sleep. Now, I want to talk about the consequences of poor sleep. These are 2 big people that we've seen recently pass away from poor sleep. So Heath Ledger, he was in Batman. He's been in a ton of different movies. I think he was in 10 Things I Hate About You, which is my daughter's favorite movie. And he died because of the cocktail of drugs that he needed to take because he couldn't sleep. He was an insomniac. He didn't sleep. And so he took opioids. He took sleep medications. He drank. He used drugs to sleep, and he died of an overdose trying to get himself to sleep. Michael Jackson did the same exact thing, insomniac, and he actually had a doctor come to his house and inject himself with anesthesia, and inject Michael Jackson with anesthesia, like putting you to sleep for some type of procedure, and he died from an overdose of that chemical, right? So people are literally dying of overdoses from poor sleep. But they're also, it's what's even worse is a lot of people are not dying, they're just living miserable lives because they're not sleeping. If you're not sleeping, you don't consolidate memory, you don't have the dopamine levels that make you feel alive. You're tired all the time, you have issues with your temper, you have issues with your mood. So there's huge consequences to poor sleep. So what I want to talk about is what the sleep cycles actually are. Okay, so I'm going to show you these sleep cycles you want to go through. And we're going to talk about sleep architecture and sleep hygiene and how you can sleep better. Okay, so the way this works is you have usually 4 or 5 of these sleep cycles, these 90-minute sleep cycles per night. Now, the first thing that happens is called N1. That's light sleep. So as soon as you start to fall asleep, that's why a lot of times when you fall asleep, you twitch, because what happens right here is you get your muscles are starting to relax. And if there's a part of your brain that's still alert, it realizes that and you feel like you're falling. That's why you twitch or kick. So that's why they call it falling asleep. So when you're falling asleep, you get this N1. And then N2 is light sleep. Okay, that's the first part of this 90-minute sleep cycle. And then you get into deep sleep, or N3. Okay, deep sleep and REM are very important. Now, they're all important, but I'm going to spend a lot of time on deep sleep and REM sleep and what happens during those things. So something fascinating happens in REM sleep is rapid eye movement, by the way. That's where you're doing your dreaming. Okay, deep sleep is where you're doing some other things, but REM sleep is where you're doing your dreaming. It's where you're consolidating memory. That's a lot of what your dreams are. It's taking all the things that you've dealt with throughout the day, and it's taking things that are familiar and consolidating them and putting things together. That's where creativity happens, is during REM sleep. Okay. Now, a lot of people think about REM sleep, but we don't think about this one. This one's super, super important. This is N3. So during N3 sleep, your body produces a bolus of growth hormone. So you get a big spike of growth hormone, which you need. Growth hormone is the fountain of youth hormone. It repairs everything in your body, gets repaired with growth hormone. So the cellular damage that you've had to proteins in your brain, the muscular damage that you've caused, damage to your liver from toxins, all of those things are cleaned out through growth hormone. So you get a big spike of growth hormone in your first, and especially in your first N3 cycle of sleep. Because remember, you're going to go through this in 90 minutes, and then you'll repeat it again. So you're going to go all the way through this. You'll go through dreaming, and then you come out of that deeper sleep. You go back through light sleep, and then you do this again. You should repeat that 4 or 5 times throughout the night. That's why 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night is crucial. If you're only sleeping 5 hours a night, you're not getting these REM sleep cycles. You're getting maybe 4 of the N3 and the REM sleep, or 3 instead of 5. So that's why 7 to 8 hours is really important. So one thing that happens again in that N3 is you get a huge boost of growth hormone. Now, this happens specifically the first time that you go through the cycle at night. So if you normally go to bed at 10 and then you deprive yourself of sleep and you stay up until midnight, part of the reason you don't feel good the next day is because you missed out on that first cycle, and you also missed out on the first N3 cycle. So you didn't get that big burst of growth hormone. Okay. So that's why it's important to go to sleep at a normal time and wake up at a normal time or a similar time every day. And again, we'll get into that with sleep hygiene in a few minutes. The other thing that happens is you get a brain flush in M3. So these deep waves, you're in delta waves over here. So when you look at an EEG, you're in delta waves. Those waves actually create a pumping in your brain that drains waste products out of your brain, called the glymphatic system. It drains waste products like beta amyloid proteins out of your brain. So if you deprive yourself, or you can't fall asleep, if your brain's running and running and running and running, you're depriving yourself of all of that from that first sleep cycle. Okay. Now, when you get into REM sleep, that's a very important part, because that's where your body's making serotonin, which makes you happy, which increases your mood, which helps you sleep. So if you're not getting those REM cycles, if you're waking up a lot throughout the night and you're not staying asleep for that full 90-minute cycle, if you wake up, you go to bed at 10, you wake up at 12:30 for a second, and then you go back to sleep, that's fine, because you're probably in light sleep. But if you're constantly waking up, you're never getting out of this light sleep into deep sleep and REM. Okay. So what happens during this REM, there's just a fascinating part of the brain called the locus coeruleus that releases norepinephrine throughout the night. Okay. So you're getting norepinephrine throughout the night to help your body consolidate memory. But when the locus coeruleus falls asleep during rapid eye movement, that's a crucial point to where it's going to improve your mood the next day. Now, the reason for that is that if you produce a lot of norepinephrine, which is adrenaline, you want to produce that throughout the night to help with memory, but you don't want to be producing it during rapid eye movement. It needs to be turned off so your body can start to detangle some of the things that have gone on throughout your day in your brain. So this locus coeruleus is turned on specifically through fight or flight, things that cause fight or flight. So that's why you don't want to watch something disturbing before you go to bed. That's why you want to be relaxed when you go to bed. You don't want to be trying to make decisions before you want to go to bed. So again, I'm going to talk about that with sleep hygiene in a few minutes. I'm just laying the groundwork here because when I talk about sleep hygiene, we're going to show you what you should do. I'm laying the groundwork so you know what this actually looks like. Okay. So when I talk about deep sleep or N3, you'll know what that means. When you talk about REM, you'll know what that means. Okay. So first thing you should be doing is getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Okay. And we'll go through that in just a minute. So I'm going to talk about some elements of sleep and some levers that you can use to improve your sleep every single night that you fall asleep. Okay. So this is what you can do at night, but there's a bigger thing that I learned through through Andrew Huberman is it's not just what you do at night, it's what you do during the day. So we're going to talk about what's called your circadian rhythms, how you can set yourself up in the morning by doing things in the morning that improve your sleep later. Okay. So let's get into some of these elements. The first element is going to be light and dark. Okay. Light and dark is a key trigger to your sleep. So there's something called the circadian cycle or circadian rhythm, which means you're alert during the day and you're not alert at night. Okay. And that's the way it goes. We as mammals, all mammals go through this. There's a circadian rhythm. All right. So rats sleep during the day and they're awake at night, but that's their circadian rhythm. Humans, we should be more alert during the day and we should be more docile or asleep at night. So that's why if you think back to our ancestors, you're in a cave. Well, you go in the cave, it's dark, cold, you sleep. You go out in the sun, it wakes you up. Well, that still happens. All right. So one thing that you need when you wake up is you need direct sun exposure during the day. Okay. So in the first 30 minutes of waking, you want to go out and view sunlight for 5 to 10 minutes. That's one of the most important things I'm going to tell you tonight. One of the most important things I'm telling you is get out and view sunlight, morning sunlight, for 5 to 10 minutes in the first 30 minutes to an hour of waking up. Okay. That's really important because what it does for you, again, we're getting pretty into the science here, but when your body wakes up, you have what's called a cortisol spike. Okay. Cortisol is the stress hormone a lot of people know about, but cortisol doesn't just mean stress, it means energy. So your cortisol levels should be higher in the morning and they should be lower at night. You want to increase that. You want to get that cortisol spike to happen as quickly as possible after you wake up, because that means you're going to be more alert in the morning. But what that also does when you spike your cortisol levels early, it kicks in your melatonin cycles 16 hours later. So it sets your body up to say, okay, my cortisol cycle happened. The clock is ticking now. 16 hours later is when I'm going to be ready for bed, which is typically what most people need to be doing, right? So you're not necessarily ready for bed 16 hours later, but you're sleeping, right? So like your melatonin levels need to get kicked in. So if your cortisol spike doesn't happen until noon, then your melatonin is not going to be in full cycle until like the next morning. So you want your cortisol spike to happen quickly so that 12 to 16 hours later you're going to get your melatonin cycle happening. So when you get up and you view sunlight, so what I do, I go outside, and I'll talk about what to do if it's dark when you wake up in a few minutes, because it is in the wintertime a lot of times when I get up. So as soon as the sun comes up, I'll go out and I'll look. Now, I don't want you to stare directly at the sun, but no, you can't have sunglasses on, and no, you don't want to be looking through like a car windshield. You want that light directly into your eyes, because what that does is that stimulates a part of your brain that stimulates that cortisol spike to go up and kicks your melatonin cycle into gear and sets that clock for later. So what you want to doing is going outside, look at the sun. It comes up in my backyard. I look at it. look near it. I can't look at it. Sometimes if it's just coming up, I can look at it. And it's also a great time to be out there. So if it's cold, I'll put a blanket on, I'll go out there, stand there for 3, 4, 5 minutes while my dog's going to the bathroom. And I know that's going to help me sleep that night. So that's huge. If it's a little bit higher in the day and you can't look right at the sun, when you're looking around, you're getting those UV rays anyway. So I'm just looking around at the backyard, looking at the trees, looking at the birds. It's a great way to do it. If you can't see direct sunlight right away, you want to see bright light. Okay. That's why you would want to get up, go in the bathroom, turn that light on bright, turn the kitchen lights on bright. You want to view bright light because that's going to, again, kick the cortisol spike in to give you more energy and alertness during the day. And it's going to kick your melatonin clock for 12 to 16 hours later. Another thing with light is you want your room as dark as it can possibly be at night. All right. So pitch black at night. So we have, blackout curtains in our room. My alarm clock is on the lowest possible setting and it's facing the other direction. Some of those alarm clocks are so bright now, it's crazy. But you also don't want to expose yourself to blue light. So blue light is the particular kind of light that comes out of your phone or your iPad. So if you're reading on an iPad or a tablet or your phone, you want to make sure your blue light filter is turned on because you don't want artificial light before you go to sleep. So if you're reading, I would rather you read with just a lamp or a book light and paper book rather than something that's coming from your device. So light and dark. So what can you do? Make sure it's dark when you sleep, and then view sunlight or dark or light or intense light when you wake up in the morning within the first 30 minutes to an hour. Okay. Another element of great sleep is exercise. Now, this is controlling temperature. So light is a trigger for sleep. So you can view sunlight or you can make sure it's dark. So you could use light in 2 ways. Temperature is another one. Okay. So when you wake up in the morning, the reason that you wake up is because your body temperature goes up. Most people know that. So if you wake up at night and you're like hot and you got to put a leg out from under the comforter, that's because that's your trigger to wake up. When your body temperature goes up, that's your trigger to be alert. Okay, so in the morning, that's usually what happens. Your temperature comes up. That's what wakes you up. But you want to get alert as quickly as possible, right? So we talked about that cortisol spike going up to make you alert. So the way that we do that is exercise. So getting 150 minutes a week of exercise paid off in a 65% increase or improvement in its quality of sleep. So just getting exercise. But best done in the first half of the day is what I want you to remember. So if you're doing that in the first part of the day, again, you're getting that cortisol level up early so that you're kicking your melatonin clock into gear. So if you can get up and do 10, 15 minutes of exercise within the first hour of waking, if you can do it in the first couple of hours of waking, that's great. I try to work out in the morning to give myself that benefit of the cortisol spike early. Now, if the only time you can work out is at 6 o'clock at night, that's still okay. Because it says here, it didn't say morning or night. It says if you just exercise, that also increases your body's ability to sleep because what it does to your brain hormones. But if you can exercise in the morning, that's really good. If you can't exercise in the morning, here's another way to make sure that your body's increasing in temperature. Now, he doesn't look like he's very warm there, but the cold shower raises the body's temperature and a rebound effect. So if you do 30 seconds to a minute of cold water therapy, right after that, your body's temperature is going to go up, right? Because it has to. It's called homeostasis. If you try to get your body's core temperature down with cold shower, your body's going to raise it really vigorously afterwards. Cold showers also raise your baseline dopamine levels. All right. They've been shown. So that's why, I'll do cold therapy. We were up in Aspen for fall break last year, and the pool was still open, but it was freezing. I mean, it had to be in the 40s, because it wasn't frozen yet, but it was almost frozen. And my daughter and I got in there and we did cold plunges in there every morning. And yeah, it's cold when you get in at the beginning, and then you kind of go numb, and then you get out and you are exhilarated. Okay. Now, I don't have a cold plunge here because those pools are really expensive, but I do have a shower. So the cold shower has also been shown to improve your immune system, raise your dopamine levels, like I said. Now, the way to do a cold shower, and research has been shown that as little as 30 seconds to a minute of a cold shower raises your baseline dopamine level, stimulates cortisol, and increases your immune system. So the way I do that is I'll go take a normal shower, right? So I get in, get the hot water heated up, get in there, take my shower, warm my body up. And then right after that, I turn the water all the way to cold, okay? and then it hits me, and it should kind of take your breath away. It's like, whew, that's cold. And I kind of turn around a few times to make sure it hits my whole body. I look at the clock and I do 1 minute of that. And then I turn the water back on hot and I get out and I'm nice and warmed up. Because I got that 1 minute of cold water, that's going to stimulate my body to raise my core temperature and raise my dopamine levels for the next several hours, which is a good thing for alertness. If you want to feel alert during the morning, which you do. So that's how you do a cold shower. I've done it before where I've just done a completely cold shower. That's a lot harder to like get your brain worked up to. You're like, man, I don't want to get in there first thing in the morning if it's freezing. So that's why I do the transition. I get in there with warm, I transition to cold, transition back to hot. The other thing it does for me, and I think it increases resilience, because I think we've become fairly fragile. I think as a country, like everything is just such a big deal to everybody. Everyone's offended by everything. Like we don't have a ton of resilience anymore. There's actually been a lot of studies on that, on fragility and anti-fragility. So basically, tough things happen to you in life. Tough things always happen to us in life. But we want to be building resilience. That's why I love exercise. That's why I love pushing my body. But when I'm in there, it's really easy for me to go, you know what? I'm not dying right now. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. So one of the big thing Wim Hof talks about with depression, he said, one of the reasons that we're so depressed is because we're not uncomfortable anymore. Now, we as humans are designed to be uncomfortable. If you think back to before we built these houses and had all these heaters and everything, like the weather was cold. We were uncomfortable. We were hungry sometimes. We were cold sometimes. We didn't have our feet hurt sometimes. Now we have almost no physical discomfort. Now we have all mental discomfort. So when I have a little physical discomfort, and I've noticed this happens with exercise. If I do intense exercise, like if I ride my bike and do intervals, or if I do some pretty intense cardio, even on the elliptical, I set that thing on level 25 and go as hard as I can. I have much less anxiety in my life. Part of the reason for that is my dopamine levels are higher, okay, which is huge. But I also realize that I'm resilient. I experience some physical discomfort, and I think that helps me because it takes some of the plate off of my mental discomfort. All right, it takes some of it off of the mental plate. So when I'm taking that cold shower, I'm like, I can my internal dialogue, oh my gosh, I want to stop this. But I go, you know what? You're not dying. It's okay. Just breathe. Just relax. It's going to be okay. It's just a little bit of cold. And I will tell you that changes your perspective on life if you start to do some things that are harder physically, that will make it easier on you mentally. That's been my personal experience. And I've seen that, and a lot of people report the same exact thing. So I do a cold shower almost every day in the morning. Cool. All right, now sleep hygiene. So what are things that you can do throughout the day to sleep better? Caffeine is one way to do it. I'm not a huge coffee fan, but for those of you that are, I recommend like bulletproof coffee, which is just a fancy word for putting fat in your coffee. So Dave Asprey came up with bulletproof coffee, but that was coffee with butter, or coffee with MCT oil, or coffee with coconut oil. Reason that is good has been shown is that fat can actually help your body absorb that calcium a little bit faster. Also decreases inflammation in the body. MCT oil is good for you. Coconut oil is good for you. They're good for your brain. So I recommend those. So, or just regular coffee if you want to do that. If you do that about an hour after waking, then that increases your cortisol spike right away. So it sets that nighttime effect 12 to 16 hours later for you. Also can increase your dopamine levels. You want to avoid caffeine after 4 p.m. If you drink caffeine after 4 p.m., it affects your sleep. It makes your epinephrine levels go up, and it makes you less likely to sleep at night. Avoid bright light at night. All right. You want to avoid bright light and blue light at night. So if you're sitting around watching TV, turn the lights down. If you have a dimmer switch in your room, turn that down. You want to be calming down the light as you're starting to get to where you're able to sleep. Avoid alcohol at night if sleep is a concern. Alcohol, a lot of people are like, well, it helps me sleep. Alcohol might help you fall asleep, but it absolutely 1,000,000% disrupts your sleep cycle. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So even a glass of red wine. So if you're worried about sleep, you want to avoid that before you go to bed. All right. So it's at least several hours before you go to bed. Avoid sympathetic activities before bed. Sympathetic meaning fight or flight. So avoid watching anything that's disturbing on TV. Avoid anything that's going to stimulate your brain and engage your brain long term. You really want to avoid that. So like the other night, I started shopping. I think I was going on a trip. That's what I was doing. I think I was planning a trip. And I started looking at different flights, and I started looking at shuttles, and I started looking at hotels, and I started comparing things. And I needed to look at my calendar, and then I needed to make sure this wasn't scheduled at this time. And I slept horribly that night because that is the last thing in the world I should have been doing before I went to bed. Right. And how did that happen? There was an alert on my tablet. I had the blue light filter on, but there was an alert on my tablet that said something about, book this trip. And I'm like, oh, let me look at it real quick. I slept horribly that night because I was in sympathetic problem solving alert mode. You don't want to be in that before you go to sleep. And then last is consistent sleep routine is key. You want to make sure you're sleeping, you're going to bed at the same time and getting up around the same time every single day. So if you stay awake one night until midnight or 2 a.m., I recommend getting up at the normal 7 o'clock the next day. Yes, you might be a little bit tired that day, but that will make you tired earlier in the evening, so you get that sleep made up that next night. Okay, so consistent sleep routine is key. Again, because if you stay up late and you miss that first 90-minute sleep cycle, you're not getting your brain, cleanse. You're not getting your growth hormone raised the way it should be. So you want to make sure you're trying to get consistent sleep patterns all throughout the night. Okay, so some brain buddies here. Let's talk about these. L-theanine. So both L-theanine and 5-HTP are both things that help you sleep and help different neurotransmitters. Both of these things are in the Insomnitol that we have in our office that a lot of people take before they go to sleep. I take that several nights a week too. Insomnitol has L-theanine. Now, L-theanine increases GABA, which is your body's brake pedal. It helps turn your brain off at night. You don't want your brain active at night, your conscious thinking brain. So it calms down the locus coeruleus in REM sleep as well. So that part of the brain I talked about that stimulates that releases norepinephrine. You don't want that during REM sleep. You don't want norepinephrine. You don't want stress during REM sleep. So L-theanine reduces that. L-theanine also increases dopamine levels and protects the neurons. Okay, so L-theanine is a great thing to take. 5-HTP increases serotonin, which helps you sleep, helps your REM sleep as well. Has also been shown to help PMS, migraines, depression, anxiety, and insomnia. So these are great things to do. You can't take 5-HTP if you're taking an antidepressant. I was just listening to a neurobiologist talk about how almost anybody with trauma should not be taking an antidepressant because when you do sleep on an SSRI, it doesn't allow your body to, it doesn't allow the locus coeruleus to calm down. It's always active. So you're not forgetting trauma. You're remembering past trauma. Now, it can make you feel happier like during the day, but it really affects your sleep. So if you are taking, an SSRI, I always talk about working with your doctor to try to not have to take that stuff because it just causes a lot of issues with your sleep and other things with your brain. Number 3, omega oils. So it increases brain volume and membrane fluidity for cell communication. It's more effective than SSRIs, which are antidepressants in clinical trials. A lot of clinical trials have shown fish oil to be more effective for depression than SSRIs like Paxil and Prozac. And then vitamin D3. Okay, so vitamin D3 I'm going to talk about here from a couple different standpoints. Vitamin D is very important for your brain, which I'll go through in a second. Okay, so I want to digress for a second with vitamin D because I don't want you learning a bunch of information. I want to actually teach you how to think like a functional medicine person or like a healthy person. So this is a new study just came out, PubMed, and it says vitamin D insufficiency may account for almost 9 out of 10 COVID-19 deaths. Evidence from observational studies accumulating suggests that the majority of deaths due to SARS-CoV-2 infections are statistically attributable to vitamin D deficiency and could potentially be prevented by vitamin D supplementation. I've been screaming this the entire time during the pandemic. Why have you not heard about this on CNN all the time? Why have you not heard about this on Fox News all the time? Why have you not heard about this on MSNBC and CBS and ABC? You didn't hear about vitamin D. The reason you didn't hear about vitamin D is because vitamin D is not making anybody rich. And you have to realize when you're watching the news, who is paying for the actual programming on the news? Who are the advertisers for the news? And if you look behind that, pharma is up to 70% in some cases, the biggest advertising. So 70% of advertising dollars for news stations coming from pharmaceutical companies. Now, pharmaceutical companies are not interested in you taking vitamin D, guys. And understand this, pharmaceutical companies are for profit. Like all businesses, like you're for profit. I understand that. But that if people start taking vitamin D and don't need their medications anymore, there's no reason that they would put that out there like crazy. Although this, like a ton of independent news agencies, a ton of people like talking about it on podcasts, like Peter McCullough and doctors like that. They were on podcasts. They weren't on the mainstream news that everybody was watching, because these independent podcasts aren't sponsored by pharmaceutical industries or companies. So that's just number one. If you take vitamin D, you're much less likely to die of COVID-19 because of what it does for your immune system. Now, here's another. This is another new study that just came out. Okay. Now, this is talking about your immune system and specifically masks. Now, I want to talk about masks for a second, because if you question the use of masks at all during the pandemic, everybody was at each other's throats over masks. If you remember this, right? Like people were having fights in stores because of I'm not wearing a mask, or you're not wearing a mask and you're going to kill me, or this or that. Back and forth like crazy. They put us at each other's throats over masks. Okay. So there was a study done by Tom Jefferson, epidemiologist at Oxford. Okay. Oxford is one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And they just released this. This is in the New York Times, by the way. This isn't in some offshoot. This was published in the New York Times. This article, where I got this from, the article was published on PubMed. So the most rigorous and comprehensive analysis of scientific studies conducted over the efficacy of masks for reducing the spread of respiratory illnesses, including COVID-19, was published late last month. Its conclusions, said Tom Jefferson, Oxford epidemiologist, lead officer, were unambiguous. And here's what he said. There is just no evidence that they, meaning masks or mask mandate, make any difference. Full stop. And then, but wait, hold on. What about N95 mask as opposed to lower quality surgical or cloth mask? It makes no difference. None of it. This is an epidemiologist, okay? This is not some right-wing or left-wing quack. And this is what's gotten crazy with the way our news has like politicized the pandemic and put everybody at opposition. There's the maskers and the anti-maskers, and everybody's at opposition instead of just saying that we're just people. Why is this important, and how can it inform your view of health experts? Well, I said a long time ago that mask on your face, that cloth mask, it was never meant to protect you. And if you were informed otherwise, you were 100% misinformed. And everybody knows that. It's not meant to protect you because the stuff still gets through. The respiratory droplets still get through. When surgeons wear a surgical mask, it's so they don't cough or spit, or big respiratory droplets don't come out. Now, it does filter big spit, mucus respiratory droplets if you sneeze or cough or something like that. But as far as your breath, it does not filter that out. You can see that because if you take your glasses and you put them over a mask, and you can still fog up your glasses. You can still fog up a glass or a window through a mask. That means respiratory droplets are getting out, and the virus is much smaller than a respiratory droplet. Okay, so it's still getting out. So then they're talking about N95 mask. Well, it was still getting off the top and the bottom of an N95 mask. And the way that we were wearing the mask, and like taking them off when you got to your table at a restaurant, and the way, taking them off when you were sipping food on an airplane. So even if they did work, you're taking them off half the time, but they weren't working. And we've known this for a long time. But the experts told you over and over again, wear the mask, 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 wear the mask. And they preyed on people's fear and insecurity. So the more you wear the mask, the quicker we stop the spread, the more you get out of your house. Well, that didn't happen. There was 2 weeks to flatten the curve that turned into 2 years, right? That didn't happen. So, and if you decide to wear a mask, that's completely I'd like you to make an informed decision about the mask, but like, if you want to wear it, that's your decision. If you don't want to wear it, you don't have to anymore, right? But this is what I saw I remember I saw at the airport. It was 2021. I was flying on a plane. There was a guy we were about to get on the tram at DIA, and his mask had fallen down to where you could see his nose. And he's like, you could tell he's busy, like trying to get his suitcase together and things like that. And as we're getting on the train, there's another guy over here screaming at him to hide his nose. He said, having your nose out is like having your genitals out. I mean, it's ridiculous what this guy was saying. And he's screaming at him, absolutely screaming at him. And I just thought to myself, what makes you think you have the right to talk to another person that way? Like, if you disagree with what he's doing, talk to him. But what gives you the right to like berate him in public because you can see the tip of his nose? Like, and the reason I say this is because it's now been shown the guy that was yelling at him was wrong. It didn't reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19. It didn't protect everybody. So the fights that were happening like that were happening because the experts told you something that wasn't even true. The same thing they told you with the vaccine is that it would prevent infection. It never prevented infection. And that's why it's not an actual vaccine. They said it doesn't prevent infection. It may prevent or reduce the severity of the effects, but it doesn't prevent infection. But they told you at the beginning, absolutely, it prevents infection. So all these things that you were told weren't even right. And they put us at each other's throats. So what I'm telling you is that when you look at what the experts are saying, you have to take that with a massive grain of salt and start looking at independent things like you're doing tonight. I'm not paid by pharma to teach you this. I'm not paid by big food to teach you any of this stuff. So you got to start looking at independent sources and different sources than you see on the news. Now, a little bit more about vitamin D in your brain. Meta-analysis conducted in 2017 shows 25 OHD concentrations less than 25 millimoles, which is what a lot of people see. A lot of people's vitamin D levels are less than 25. It increases for the risk of dementia, especially in adults and patients over the age of 65. Low vitamin D increases the risk of dementia. Several studies have been shown the link between vitamin D and depression. Okay. Vitamin D shows low levels of serotonin in the hippocampus seen in depression. The hypothesis argues that vitamin D reduces the increase in neural levels of calcium that are driving depression. When you have high levels of neuron calcium, that increases depression because it lowers serotonin levels. 2014, Gezin et al. Conducted a study which showed vitamin D levels regulate the release of nerve growth factor, an essential molecule for the neuronal survival of hippocampal neurons as well as cortical neurons, which means vitamin D protects your brain and prevents neural degeneration. So vitamin D, hugely important for everybody. Everybody on planet Earth should be taking this and should have been taking this. And I've been talking about this for 20 years. So vitamin D, major brain buddy there. Okay. So chiropractic in your brain, this might be the most exciting thing that I talk about because what actually happens when you get adjusted. So this is a little girl wobbling on a wobble cushion. When she's wobbling, she is stimulating her brain. Most people think of chiropractic care as like back pain or neck pain. It's not back pain or neck pain. It's brain-based medicine. That's what this does. So posture in your brain, 90% of the stimulation of nutrition to the brain is generated by movement of the spine. I'll say that again. 90% of input into the brain nutritionally is stimulated by normal motion of your spine. Normal motion does not mean moving your back. It means every segment of your spine moving individually. And I'll show you more on that in a second. There's now solid evidence that chiropractic adjustment can boost brain function by 20%. Huge. That's why I get adjusted, not because my neck hurts or my back hurts. That's why I will get adjusted the rest of my life, is because that's the key part of taking care of my brain. Okay, chiropractic and depression. This is a literature study. Major depression has been linked to several different factors in your brain. One of them is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. Reduced BDNF levels have been observed in the prefrontal cortex of stressed animals, suicide subjects, and depressed patients. When you have reduced brain-derived neurotrophic factor, you are more depressed. Nerve growth factor is another one. Nerve growth factor acts as a modulator in the HPA axis and contributes to maintaining the neuroendocrine and immune systems. Neuroendocrine systems are like serotonin, dopamine. That's what makes you happy. So nerve growth factor has been proved to have antidepressant effects. Now, what does that have to do with chiropractic? Chiropractic works on the immune system, on the nervous system, stimulating it to release various chemicals. Within that nervous system lies the vagus nerve. Now you have a nerve in your neck that starts at the base brainstem right here, goes all the way down to your colon. It's called the vagus nerve. Research indicates that vagus nerve stimulation, which is what happens with a chiropractic adjustment, influences cell differentiation and survival of BDNF expression. So that means is it raises your BDNF, it raises your brain-derived neurotropic factor, it raises your nerve growth factor through vagus nerve stimulation. That's what happens every time you get an upper cervical adjustment in our office. Another one, the link between brain starvation and Alzheimer's disease, says if the brain doesn't get enough glucose, energy from sugar, then you start to develop something called beta amyloid protein. This enzyme activates a type of sticky protein called beta amyloid. which has been shown in greater amounts in people with Alzheimer's disease upon autopsy. They're saying that's the causative factor for effect of Alzheimer's disease, or factor for Alzheimer's disease is beta amyloid protein. Okay. So what happens when you get adjusted? What did we just say back here? 90% of the stimulation and nutrition to the brain is through normal motion of the spine. Okay. So when you do that, you're preventing this issue with brain degeneration called beta amyloid protein. Okay. So how does this work specifically? So this is super, super important. So the upper part of your spine, C1 and C2, contains something called mechanoreceptors. Okay. And in mechanoreceptors, that's what stimulates your brain to function and your brain to keep the light bulb at 100%. So think of your brain as a light bulb. The way that that light bulb stays juiced is not just through glucose or sugar. It's actually through stimulation of joints in your body. Okay. 90% of the mechanoreceptors in the spine are at C1 and C2, which means every time you move your head, if C1 and C2 are moving properly, okay, if they're moving properly, then you're getting a huge barrage of input into your brain. And that light bulb over here is super bright, which means your brain is working better. Your mood is better. Your dopamine levels are higher. Your sleep centers work better. Your memory works better. All of those things happen when your brain is turned up on that dimmer switch. That happens through normal motion of C1 and C2. Okay. Now I say normal motion. Most people don't have normal motion of C1 and C2 because they have what's called a subluxation or a misalignment. That's largely from sitting on a computer too much, from a loss of the cervical curve in the neck. You no longer have normal motion of C1 and C2. So watch what happens. You get spinal cord temperature or tension. You don't get arterial supply back up into the brain. We talked about feeding the brain just a minute ago with beta amyloid proteins. Your cerebral spinal fluid decreases, which means your body is not flushing those beta amyloid proteins out of your brain anymore. Your balance is compromised. Stress levels go up because you have more fight or flight chemicals stimulated in your brain, because when you get those normal inputs of C1 and C2, that puts you in parasympathetic. It takes you out of fight or flight mode. So if those bones aren't moving properly, you're in fight or flight mode. Your pain levels go up. Now, the way that we could tell if C1 and C2 are moving properly is what's called a flexion extension X-ray. So when we take a patient like this who has no curve in the neck, this is an X-ray from the side. You should have a 45-degree curve in the neck like this. She does not. And when we were able to do flexion, the only way you can tell how the spine is actually moving is called flexion extension X-rays. When she looks down, you can see the space here and here, the space between C2 and C1. That space should get way bigger when she looks down. But when you get over here, there's hardly any difference. There's really no difference in the space between C1 and C2. What does that tell me? It says there's no difference in space here or here, which means C1 is not moving at all when she goes into flexion. So what she's not getting is normal motion back up into the brain to have her brain function normally. So what do you think she deals with? Depression, anxiety, sleep problems, headaches. So the only way you could tell that is by getting a flexion extension X-ray. And that's what we do in our office. So if you've never had that X-ray, if you're sitting there right now and you're watching this, you've never had that X-ray, whoever sent this to you, get a hold of them and find out where they can get a flexion extension X-ray. If you're one of our patients, or if somebody referred to you as one of our patients, get into the office and get a flexion extension X-ray, because the most important thing you're taking care of in this whole thing is your spine. So I know we went through a lot, and I hope it gives you some things that you could take away from this, but just remember, your brain's the most important thing you take care of. And sleep is one of the most important things you can do to take care of that brain, along with having normal function of your spine. So if you do those two things, you're going to be in really good shape. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. You can get a hold of me. My email address is eShoemake. That's SHUEMAKE, the number 1, eShoemake1@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have and get any of the help that you need. So thanks for being with us. Just share the word, because so many people need to hear this.